So it's 7 o'clock. We'll get started with the December 1st, 2021 Wetlands Commission agenda. First on the agenda is 9 Washington Circle.
I talked to the applicant this morning. She is still working on getting some revised plans, so she will be attending at the January meeting.
Okay, good, because I think that's kind of the feeling that people had as well while they were working on the plan. So, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Do we need to formally table that to
No.
January meeting?
No, that'll be fine.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is 48 River Road.
All right, 48 River Road. We have the applicant on here, Mr. Kraken.
No.
Where is he here?
Yeah, he's just so.
Yeah.
Hal Johansson.
Yes.
And
See him.
and Pat, if you could unmute yourself.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Thanks so much.
Unmuted.
Hold on. Oh, you know what we forgot? We've got to read the. I apologize. I've got to do a roll call, and then I forgot we got to read the legal notice. So, Robert Hannon,
I'm here.
Rich Berlandi,
Here.
David Fox, Robert Eisner,
Here.
Neil Kelsey,
Here.
Mark Simpson,
Here.
Ned Stachin,
Here.
and Emily Burke. Brick, sorry, absent.
No.
All right. Yeah, we have the legal notice here. It's right in here. Can you see the screen?
It's locked on.
Who was that?
Maple Ave,
Hey, Bob, all right.
right there at top. There you go.
Who is the legal notice?
Just,
Eisner?
can I just make a comment here? If people are on, but they're not involved in the application that the commission is looking at, can you please mute yourself? Thank you.
Secretary's minutes.
Mhm.
So do you want me to read the notice now?
Whoever wants to read it, either you or.
Go ahead. Town of Farmington Inland Wetlands Commission. Notice hereby given that the Inland Wetlands Commission will hold an online public hearing on Wednesday, December 1st, 2021 at 7 p.m. via online web conference on the following application: Calco Construction, Inc. Application for regulated activity with an upland review area related to proposed residential subdivision located at 168 Copper Mine Road. Interested parties are encouraged to participate in the online public hearing. The link to this meeting is found on the Farmington website. I'm not going to read that, but a copy of the proposal is also online, so people should have had a chance to be able to follow this up and check it out, or please call the planning department at the Farmington Town Hall at 860-675-2325, dated Farmington, Connecticut, this 10th day of November, 2021, Inland Wetlands Commission, Robert Hannon, Chairman. So
All right, we went over 9 Washington.
portion. Pardon?
No, nothing.
Okay.
Next one is going to be 48 River Road. We've got Hal Johansson, the owner of the property, and Mr. McCracken on here, who's the solar installer. So feel free to start.
Yeah, I'm Hal Johansson, and I put an application in to put solar panels in front of my house at 48 River Road. It's in the middle of, it's going to be in the middle practically of my 5 acres. So it shouldn't be too offensive to anybody.
Patrick, you want to jump in at all? Give a little explanation?
Yeah, please. Maybe one of those slides, maybe the one right there it is. So we're looking at a location in the front yard, which how do you know which the front yard is? But it's actually where that little parking lot is with a couple of vehicles in it.
Yep.
That grassy area to the north of that would be considered the front yard, and then to the right. And Hal has taken out a number of the trees that appear here, but I drew a sort of somewhat horizontal line at the edge of that yard to indicate,
This picture.
you know, where we would desire to begin the location process for a ground mounted solar system. So somewhere in that area, we're going to want to do a layout and measure the drop over, you know, the footprint of the installation, so that we can get the steel just perfect, so that it sits all horizontal and wonderful. But our big question, I think Hal's big question and Linda's big question is that going to be within the limits of what's acceptable to this commission, that general location right there?
Okay, well, this is a picture of what it's gonna look like.
This is representative of the structure that will go onto the ground before the panels are installed. And this structure is a bit larger than the one that Hal and Linda will need. This
And
is, go ahead.
how big is your structure?
It's gonna be, well, I put it in the email. I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but it's probably gonna be 15 feet shorter in length than this.
I think you gave us like 13 and a half by like 48 and a half.
40, 45, something like that.
Okay, and
We've
then
got
how
to
are
get that
these-
final drawing back, so we're just in the preliminary stages. But before we really get down to brass tacks, I guess, we kind of wanted to just make sure that this was okay with all of you.
How are these foundations set in the ground?
You know, typically it's just a sonotube with some cement in it.
Okay. And here's some pictures of the panels. I also have pictures of the property for the commissioners as well. Here's River Road. Here's the driveway coming up. Here's the house, and the solar panels are going to go right around here. There is wetlands all around in this area here. Here's the picture looking at the house. There's that little parking area. The intent, from what I'm told,
Right
is
there.
the panels will be down in this spot here. Now, they're going to be within the lawn area, right? They're not going to, you guys aren't going to do any kind of clearing in the woods to put these. It's all going to be in the existing lawn.
Right.
That's correct.
Okay. Anything else?
That pretty well shows where it's gonna be, to the right there. Right up against the woods, but on the lawn.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that one thing I would offer, I don't know, I just got a tax bill for impermeable surfaces on my property here up in Mass. And I was like, well, shoot, let me just go tear out the driveway and put in gravel if we're going to tax me like that. That was my first response. But my second one, and I guess the reason I mentioned that is we also sometimes look at these solar structures for carports and things like that, verandas and the like. And the reality is that they are not waterproof. They're not watertight. Water goes through in between each panel. So I don't know how much you care about runoff or that sort of thing, but I think this sort of structure right here isn't going to impede that water transfer to the ground below. But again, I don't know what your major concerns are as a commission here. I just thought I'd mention that. I hope it wasn't too far off topic.
No, how tall, we usually want to know, how tall is this from the bottom, from the grade?
Yeah, the lowest we like to go with is 18 inches and the highest we really bother with is 24 inches. Other than that, you're kind of wasting money.
Okay.
But 18 inches to 20, like, so our average install height right there is 20 inches.
So what
on
goes
the
underneath the
leading
panels?
edge.
So what goes
Say again?
underneath the panels? Is it just lawn, or is there stone underneath the panels, or what?
Yeah, it depends on how type A you are about your lawn, I suppose. If it was me, I'd throw some cedar chips in there. But you could let the grass grow. You probably want to weed eat once a summer anyway.
All right, Chair, if there's any, I think he's all set.
Yeah, let's just go around to the commission members and see if they have any questions or comments. Ned, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, I was looking at Bing Maps, and it said Unionville Brook tributary. Where is that located on this?
Right here, I'll show you. Comes in down through here, comes underneath
Okay.
here, curves back, rolls down by Bridgehampton, Strawfield, and then goes down to Railroad Avenue.
Okay,
So,
then south of that tributary is the wetlands.
yeah, it's pretty much when I went out there, you can tell by the photos, pretty much the edge of the lawn is the wetland area. There was a
Okay.
map from the was it the 70s? Right there, 76 here. There is a map showing the edge of the wetlands here.
Okay, all right. And I'm kind of curious because I know I could see the lawn area and you're putting in the lawn area, but if you're going right up against the tree line, are you going to have enough solar time? I mean, do you anticipate possibly needing to clear some trees to get enough solar
No.
time on these, or?
There's
Shouldn't have to cut any.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't foresee that being necessary.
Okay,
There certainly appears to be enough solar time, given the current cover.
okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Mark?
Well, continue on that same subject. Can you put the picture back on of the backyard, the front yard? Yes. Well, right there, back. Yeah. So you said you cut some trees. Is that the stumps I see that were cut?
Yes, there were some dead trees there. And there was one hemlock that was infected with that white disease.
Fungus or something.
So I assume that area is like right on to where the wetlands, the limits are, or where is the wetlands in that picture?
About 10 feet more into the woods is where that was depicted in 76.
Yeah, I mean, so it seems like you've done your cutting, that's what you're going to do. Anything beyond that further point, if you were going to remove trees, it would be important that you contact the town, because if you get into wetlands, you're not supposed to remove anything without permission first.
Right, they're 10 feet, about 10 feet away from the wetlands.
Yeah, we're not gonna cut down any more trees.
That's all I have to say.
All right, thanks, Mark. Neil?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, Robert?
No questions.
Okay. Emily has not popped in yet, has she?
Nope.
Okay, Rich?
No questions.
Okay, I'll ask mine then. I'm a little confused in looking at the shade report diagram and what you actually show on sort of the plot plan. Because in the shade report, it looks as though the solar panels are a southern exposure, which is typically what you want. But yet in the plot plan, it almost looks like they're more of a north to south. And so it's got more of an eastern flavor to it.
Where's the plot plan?
Yeah,
Which one is that?
Right here. Oh,
You just want-
sorry. Bear with me, don't get sick. Right here. North is up here, so this is a north, this is south on the
yeah, but
bottom.
no, actually, where they actually have in red pencil or red ink,
Yeah.
they're showing the location of the soul right here.
Your
That's
staff
more
drew
of
that.
the north-south direction. The shade report has it going, it's an east-west direction, and it's a southern exposure. which is typically what you want for the solar panels. So I'm trying to figure out which is it? You know, what is the proposal?
Mr.
Is it
Hannon?
going to be similar to what's here, or is it going to be what's proposed in the shade report?
So your staff drew that red box,
Yeah.
or
Okay.
Sandra, Ms. Shout?
Yep.
And I've tried to put some little arrows on that red box in the, to the right of your pointer to try and get that indicated that that needs to skew
like this.
long leading edge to the south perpendicular.
Okay,
Yeah.
now that's fine, because if you put it in that location, then you shouldn't have to worry about any more trees, because you're not going to have any shading,
Mhm.
because the trees are going to be behind it and more than the northern exposure. So, okay, that's fine there. I guess I have a question in terms of the posts that are being proposed. Because in looking at the diagrams, it looked as though you were proposing screw posts. So I was going to ask if they were screw driven or if they were just sort of pounded, you know, the driven post. And you're talking about putting in like a sonotube and then concrete backing. And if so, how deep is that? Because I'm concerned about wind. Should we get any type of strong winds?
So I guess what I would offer is that I'm not an engineer and I don't play one in real life. And that's a very valid question. My job is to help Hal and Linda figure out what they need. And then this meeting came right up, but we're in a 2-week to 1 month long process where we need to do engineering work. And we actually hire a subcontractor whose specialty is these ground mounted structures to do their engineering work on this particular job. And then I'll have those answers for you probably in January, should you approve this in theory. But we don't necessarily want to pay a couple $1,000s to our engineering company to do the work and then have you disprove the idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I follow where you're going with it, so it's not a problem. It's just, I've had a little bit of experience over the years dealing with solar projects. Some a whole lot larger than this, but so I was just trying to get a better flavor for it. But I really don't have any other questions on it. I think,
But to speak to that question though, Mr. Hannon, it's our intention to meet or exceed any and all applicable standard.
yeah, I didn't see anything in terms in the diagrams, like the depth of the posts and things of that nature. But
Mhm.
granted, this is a lot smaller than what I'm used to seeing, but most of those tend to be 8 to 10 feet deep with the posts. So again, it may be the same thing for a small one. It may be 6 feet. I don't know, but it's just something I think that needs to be looked at. I mean, I'm not sure that anybody, at least I don't particularly have a problem with it, but we cannot render a decision tonight. What we can do is accept the application. Because technically we need at least 15 days before we can render a decision on an application. So this is, because we're accepting it tonight, right?
Well, the option is
What we're
to,
supposed to do.
the option is if we consider it an as of right situation is the only other option.
Yeah, because I mean, again, I think with what typically goes on is, I would think that this would be a regulated activity. I mean, it's not quite like putting on, just adding a back porch, that type of thing. I would be inclined to have the application in and we go ahead, vote on accepting the application for this meeting, and then that'll give them time to go ahead and pull together the information they need. Because I think those are some of the questions that the commissioners have. I don't think you heard anybody state that they're vehemently opposed to it. It's just a matter of making sure that, some of the questions are answered. As far as whether or not you keep grass under it, wood chips under it, gravel, the only issue really comes about typically is under the drip edge, and you don't really have enough panels here to really create a problem with the drip edge, at least. That's from what I've seen in the past. I would kind of apply that logic here as well. So if, I mean, that's enough to kind of get you where you need to go for the next step. Then what I would like to do is accept a motion from somebody to go ahead and accept the application.
This is Ned. I'll make a motion to accept the application.
Is there a
Mark,
second?
Second,
Mark, was that you seconding?
that was Mark seconding.
Yep.
Ed and Mark.
Any discussion on it, Ned?
I don't see any problems with it, but I do agree that we should have the information of, you know, I don't know if they have to hire the engineer, but just have a better feeling on what the options are. I mean, if you use a sonotube, I would think it'd be pretty small. Screw in, you know, but I guess we should either have it be known that it's going to be one or the other, or actually, even if there's several options out there, as long as we know all the options and know the options that we think cause a problem for the nearby wetlands, then I think that would be fine too. But there's nothing unreasonable about the application.
Mark?
I don't see anything that would, upset me about this. As long as they don't go too, any further into the woods where it gets close to the wetlands, I have no problems.
Okay, thank you, Neil.
Yeah, I don't have any concerns or issues.
Okay, thank you. Robert?
no concerns.
Rich?
No concerns.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to accept the application. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, abstaining. And we look forward to the material coming in for the January meeting.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
You're welcome.
Next on the agenda is 11 Maple Avenue. I think we've looked at this site previously.
Yep, this was an application, and I have it at the end of the section here. This was a previous application you guys did in 2021. Sorry, 2020. The year's going by already. Where's it here? I had it right here. Right here. Yeah. That's the conservation. Where is it? I just apologize. Give me a second here. There you go. Here it is. This is for a new house. We had you guys had approved an application for a new house off of Maple Avenue. It entailed a construction of a driveway, crossing someone's property. There was some minor wetland encroachment and filling in and disturbance here. The owner met with the owner last month. They're looking to put a retaining wall along that conservation easement to prevent further erosion of the slope. So Sal is on the phone or is online here.
Yes, hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yes, good evening. So as Bruce was saying, we met last week. We're in the middle of the house construction, and upon the completion of the foundation and putting the house up, as you can see in the pictures, we had some concerns about the erosion being too close to the already approved disturbance. So what my builder was suggesting, he say, hey, why don't you speak with the commission if they will allow us, because this area calls for the boulders, big rock boulders. But he said the house being too close to the boulders or whatever we put there, it might just not be enough to stop the erosion if it rains, because the way everything slopes. So he said, if anything, obviously there would be no machinery going in there since everything is open. We would pour a small footing and then we would construct the wall only alongside of the house to the left side. And if anything, it would be closer 1 foot to the house. So we would work within approved disturbance area when we were finished, we would move it towards the house about a foot. And then we would just, pour concrete as a sidewalk and slope it down. So all the rainwater or wash water would wash into it instead of eroding from, the dirt and everything. And as where the wall would stop right at the edge of the house, then we would continue with the boulders as originally planned towards the end of the driveway and the maple and the street, as you can see in the plan. So we really are not asking for, anything additional, just to, instead of the boulders, if we could just do a permanent small wall that would be closer to a house about a foot and be lower. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I'm just curious though, when you say a small wall, what's your definition of a small wall?
Small wall would be a foot lower than the foundation. So that way there's a slope about foot lower than the foundation wall. So when we backfill it and when we pour a sidewalk, as you will, it would have a reasonable slope. So all the rainwater would wash off instead of washing onto the dirt and eroding into the wetlands. Is what, if Bruce, I met with Bruce here, I called him because that was our concern, and he took some photos, and I don't know if Bruce can bring him up, so that way we can kind of get a better idea of how that would, go on. Yes, you see how the black fence goes, so it would be just a little bit taller than that, but it would still have the pitch. So when we backfill it, if you see all the dirt, when it rains, it wouldn't erode onto the wetlands. It would just be almost a permanent wall. So that way it wouldn't have any problems down the road. And like I said, we would be where the black silt is, we would be closer, about a foot closer to the house. Right about there. Yes. So we figure we ask for this now, since we're in the middle of construction, versus if I keep having problems and I come back a couple years later with new photos and say, hey, this is what we're dealing with, and then, deal with it. I think I would ask just if it can be done while we at it right now and be done with it.
Okay. Ned, do you have any questions on this one?
I guess I obviously have bare soil erosion, but once you put this, and I don't know, like a mixed size riprap and some boulders, I'm not sure why we think we're still going to get erosion.
Ned, I'm sorry, you broke up in the first few seconds. I didn't
Okay.
understand. What were you saying,
So-
bud?
I'm kind of curious as, I see the photo here and I see, the bare soil and we're getting erosion on the bare soil.
Right.
But if you were to put in, I don't know, was that supposed to be a riprap or you said boulders? I don't know, but usually you would cover it with like a crushed stone or different, a mixed size stone.
Well,
And-
when we say boulders, we meant by where the black silt fence goes, we were actually thinking to put like a 4-foot boulders, like a big stone boulders.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way that they can be self-standing, instead
Yeah.
of building a permanent, like a retaining wall, which not only wouldn't be cost effective because there's nobody looking at the house from that side, but it also, then that would do the trick. So instead of these big boulders, we're asking if we can just put a permanent wall, backfill in between, and then pour concrete with the slope. So everything that rains or all the rainwater, everything, snow melting, it can just go right into the, it can wash off right into the wetlands instead of eroding away. Is what Sev, our surveyor, proposed when he came to look at it. That's up on that. That's, kind of made good point with the builder. So that's when we called Sev, and we wanted to kind of just circle an idea on all of this. And that's really the only way, because in the back of the property all the way, there's a gabion wall that runs along the side.
Yeah.
So that was the only way that they were able to do it. But I mean, for me to put a gabion wall here, I wouldn't even have, not only that I wouldn't have room, it's just that I wouldn't, it wouldn't be feasible.
So then you're gonna cover that whole area with concrete from the wall to the
Correct,
house?
but Ned, we would go 1 foot closer to the house. So actually, the black silt is where the approved wetland is, or the approved disturbance is. So it would be a closer 1 foot to the house. So that way, we wouldn't use all the
Yeah.
approved disturbed area. We would just use what we need, and we would leave the rest of it alone.
Okay.
And
I mean,
like
I guess
said,
I don't have any strong opposition to it. I just don't understand. I mean, it's bare soil right now, so you're getting erosion, but once you put a cover it with stone or whatever it is, the final approval is, then I would think that would cut down on the erosion, but
It's not-
it is kind of a slope there, and I guess making it, so how much of a drop off are you looking from the top of the wall to the grade on the far side of the wall?
a foot,
A foot?
correct.
Okay, all right.
And I think pictures don't do any justice. That's why I called Bruce to originally come and take But like, if you're looking at this picture right now, there's actually in the backyard, there's a pretty good slope going that way. So I'm not only
Yeah.
concerned about the house area, but like the whole backyard itself. And if you see where the black silt fence is, if that was a solid wall, then we could just backfill all this and then just concrete it up towards the house and be done with it. And it would take care of all the problems.
Why do you need to cover it with concrete? If you make it more level,
Well, it
Why is
doesn't
it-
have to be a concrete. It can be crushed stone. It can be a marble stone or something that would just wash off or wash away,
yeah.
if it makes any sense.
It's to just, I mean, like, I don't know, I guess I'm kind of concerned, like, if that ends up being, because you have concrete there, that ends up being where you put your garbage pails or store stuff on the side of the house, then
No,
everything that falls in there, and then it drains into the wetland.
no, the garbage pails are in the garage. Yeah, nothing is stored on that side.
Okay.
In fact, the other
Well-
side of the house will have a shed where the lawnmower and everything else will
Right.
be stored. Nothing would be stored on this side because it's
But-
going to be about 3.5 feet
Yeah,
anyway. So,
okay,
So yeah,
All
we
right.
wouldn't store a car or a motorcycle or anything, or a garbage
Yeah.
pail. And
but you don't know what the
especially,
next owner of the house is gonna do.
well, especially when my neighbor told me he saw a bear on the side of the house, I sure hell I'm not leaving no garbage pails outside. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Ned. Mark,
I have no questions.
Neil,
No, I have nothing to ask.
okay, Robert,
First to comment, we already approved the disturbance with the original approval, so I'm just wondering if this almost falls into the, use as of right for a residential purpose. And maybe this would be Bruce or the applicant. What's the distance from the silt fence to the wetland line? Because this is all buffer area disturbance, correct?
It is, yeah, it is. In that area, I want to say it is the actual wetland line. Because let me go to the plan. I did it back at the end here. Let's see.
yeah, because there was the brook that went down the
Yeah,
side
the
of the
brook was
yard.
close.
Yeah. See, there's
I
the
remember the brook-
conservation easement. There's the conservation easement line.
So we would actually be within a foot from the approved conservation easement line.
Yeah. Here's the conservation easement line where it's kind of, it follows the
Okay.
edge of this, it follows the line right here. So there was wetland disturbance. The wetland line was here. You approved wetland disturbance up to this point. So the conservation easement is this line. So the retaining wall will be set back according to Sal a few feet behind
Yes,
conservation.
correct.
So in here.
Correct. And Bruce, if you move up a little closer to the end of the house, up towards the street, right, little more towards the end. Go back towards the porch. No, towards the house. If you right there at the end of the house, no, keep going back. That's right there. That's where we would stop the wall. The wall would stop right there.
Yep,
And then
stop.
we would slope everything down and put the boulders as originally planned or approved. So we're not looking to put the wall all the way, just to the edge of the house. And then slope everything down with the boulders and trees or whatever we plan on doing.
So to install the footing for the wall, what type of equipment, how are you gonna excavate out the material and install the footing in the retaining wall?
We're gonna hand dig it. We don't have to trench anything since it's already open. So we can just not dig it, just hand level it a little bit and then form it for the footing, pour the footing. Then once we have a solid footing, we can just form the wall, the height of the wall we need, and then just pour it and backfill it and be done with it once for all.
Okay, so you can do that work without going into the area that is conservation easement.
Correct. And no machinery will go in there. No, none of that stuff.
Excuse me, Commissioner Eisner.
Yeah.
Sal, that footing is gonna have to be below grade, is gonna have to be below frost line. So you're gonna have to get
It
that
is.
like 42 inches below frost.
It is, but like I said, we're not bringing, we have help. We're not gonna dig it with the machines.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay, no additional questions. Thank you.
Good, thanks, Robert. Rich?
So the top, I see a 94-foot contour there, which is about a little more than 2.5 feet below your finished floor elevation. So is your proposed retaining wall, the top of that wall, going to be at about elevation 94?
The top of the retaining wall will be a foot lower than whatever the foundation wall ends. So foundation, remember, this is a grade on slab. There's no basement. So the foundation is not sticking up high out of the ground. So
So
whatever
your
the elevation, what's that?
So your plan here shows the top of the foundation at 96.6. You're saying the top of the wall is going to be a foot below that, so it'll be 95.6,
Correct.
which is higher than the grading that was originally shown on your plan, and about 2.5 feet above the wetland area. Because the
Well, that's
wetlands
why
are
we
right
want to
around
put the
elevation
wall.
92. So you're going to have basically a 3-foot high wall, if I'm reading the
Exactly.
numbers correctly.
Correct. Yeah, it's probably like a more of like a knee wall than it is anything.
Okay. And the whole purpose of doing this wall is just to eliminate that slope?
Erosion. To eliminate erosion.
Well, if you sloped it, graded it, and then planted it, you could eliminate the erosion that way too. But I mean, it's your property.
Right.
Okay, that's the only questions I had. Thank you.
I don't really have much in the way of questions. I know the one thing that if this does go forward, we would want to make sure that all the work is being done towards your property and not in the conservation easement. Because Bruce, I don't think you were involved so much with a lot of the discussions that we had the last time, but I thought one of the reasons for also putting up the boulders was to help delineate sort of the wetland area and the conservation easement. Wasn't that correct?
Yes. Yeah, and I think it was the sloping as well. I think it was doing a twofold, because it does drop off pretty steep there, so to actually prevent that from sloughing off, and then the boulders were a clear delineator.
Yeah, so on the side of the house, you put in a retaining wall. It basically serves the same purpose
Mhm.
as the boulders would, as far as a demarcation line of where the conservation easement goes. But so, yeah, I mean, I really don't have a whole lot of heartburn with it. I know we walked the site. People got to see what it was like over there. And I mean, you're not going to do a whole lot with a 3.5, 4 foot wide strip of land anyway. So this may be one of those things they can go in, stabilize it, and be done with it. But okay, so I guess at this point in time, Robert raised a question as to whether or not this might be something they can do as of right. So want to talk about that, because if we decide that that is in fact the way to go, fine. Otherwise, we would need to accept the application. So Ned, I'll start with you. What's your take on the path we should follow here? What do you feel more comfortable with?
I think maybe I do agree with Robert. I mean, I think we've covered the protection and as long as we're clear that any work on this wall and the foundation is going to be from his side of the property and nothing goes into the wetlands, then, you know, I think we're kind of covered with the original application. It's not exactly how it was laid out, but I think, you know, sometimes you start construction, you run into unanticipated problems and you make adjustments. So, you know, I kind of lean towards this being, you know, kind of falling under our original approval.
Okay,
That's all.
okay, thank you. Mark?
I could go along the same line of thinking.
Okay, Neil, I know you're new to this particular site, but any
Yeah.
comments?
I'm not sure what the as of right means, since I'm new to the committee as well, but so I would defer to the rest of the committee. But it does, you know, just on the surface, it does seem to me that this was approved, and this is not a major change. So if that matters.
Okay, no, thank you, appreciate it. Robert?
Yeah, you know, again, I think we approved the original disturbance. We established the conservation easement area. This work can all occur on the development side of the conservation easement. The only hesitancy I have is just, you know, how the footing goes in that. So I asked the original question and Bruce said it needs to go fairly deep. So I think it falls within the residential exemption for use as of right. But the detail for the excavation, and I don't know, Bruce, if it would require a building permit for the wall or not, but the detail on how to do the excavation and the soil and erosion control being maintained during that activity would be key, but I think it falls within the residential exemption.
Yeah, he provided the detail here, and then that's where I had threw the question out to them that there needs to be a footing on this, and they said they understand and that they were looking for your approval, and then that they're going to design the wall with the footing, and then it'll be offset, so the wall actually will get kicked back a little bit further because the footing will be down here. So, and they said they will do that upon approval.
Okay, and Bruce, you and the rest of the town staff would have the ability to approve or modify that design, right?
Yes. Yep. Exactly. So,
Okay.
I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I would hold this 8 inches. If you don't have a problem with the 8 inches, I will hold that 8 inches for the location of the footing, and then the wall will be stepped back however far back they want it off of that. So,
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Rich?
Yeah, I'm kind of looking at it as he's substituting a wall for the boulders in that same area. So minor modification to the original approval.
Okay, thanks. I'm kind of in the same boat. So does somebody want to make a motion that this is something that can be, you know, considered sort of a change in the original plans, and it's something that's allowed by right, or however you want to phrase it. So Robert, I know you came up with the idea, so I don't know if you want to go ahead and throw some language out for us.
Yeah, I would make a motion that the proposed development modification falls within the exemption for residential use as of right. What is it, 4.13, whatever that citation is. And just with the understanding, the contractor and owner will work with the town staff on final design and soil and erosion control during the activity.
I'll second that. Ned.
Okay, and seeing as how we kind of had some discussion on this, I'm going to go directly to a vote. So those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Bruce, it's in your court.
All right, sir, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Hey, good luck with it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll go to sort of the end of the new business. So now we'll start with the public hearing for Calco construction.
Yes, sir.
Assuming the applicants here with their staff, with their consultants.
Yes, they're all online.
Okay. We already read the notice into the record. One of the things I would like to do, and Sandy, I'm going to need your help on one of these because I could not read the woman's last name, but also check me on this. We did receive some correspondence from Thomas Marcello, Kathy Leary, Sarah Prentice Brown, Conrad, and Mary Beth Peterson. I know it was Virginia, but I'm not sure. Was it
Yes, I don't.
McQuayendall? I couldn't read. I wasn't sure how the last name was spelled out because it was all cursive.
Yeah.
Then Edward and Diane Clerkin, Joan and William Bartuccia, Betty Coyendall, Stephen Lawler and Melvin and Elaine Bemis. Did I miss anybody on the list? Those are the ones that I saw. I just want to make sure because some of them were duplicates. So I just want to make sure that I got all of those letters.
I got the list.
into
Yeah, I got the list right here. I'm not sure. I was trying to follow through with you, but there's the Kathy Leary at 19 Whispering Rod, Betty Cloakendale at 15 Whispering
Yep.
Rod, Stephen Lawler at 154 Coppermine Road. We have the one from 158 Coppermine Road, Bemis, and
I mean, I went through all of them earlier. I just didn't know if I forgot something.
no, I think that's it. I just want to make sure the list I had. This was Bartucca at 50 Redcoat. Then we got the 12 Twin Ponds, and the Petersons at 25 Redcoat, and then the 29 Redcoat. Clerkin at 48 Redcoat, Hotchkiss at 40 Redcoat Lane, Thomas Marcello at 148 Coppermine. And those were all sent to you guys via packages.
So I just wanted to make sure that they're part of the record. So, okay.
All right. Brian, if you want to start.
Perfect. So for the record, Brian Panico, Harry Cole & Son, 876 South Main Street, here on behalf of Calco Construction, Inc. So go through and give a brief overview of this existing parcel. So the existing parcel is zoned R30 residential. It's 14.39 acres. It's currently one lot. It had a single family house, a barn, quite a few outbuildings. It's mostly wooded on the west side, which includes the wetlands, and a little more cleared on the eastern side, which used to be farmed and everything. We walked those fields, which are now super overgrown. The commission may remember during our site walks. To the south is Coppermine Road, and then residential properties kind of surround this whole piece on the north, east, and the west. There's approximately 4.04 acres of wetlands on the site. Once again, you can see on the kind of color rendering in front of you, that's that lighter green on the west, and then there's a small in the northeast corner, a little pocket of wetlands that continues up in that direction. And there are approximately 2.35 acres of upland review area on this site as well. So go over the proposal in full just for the public's input, since this is now a hearing. This is a R30 cluster subdivision. Cul-de-sac off of Coppermine Road provides access to 11 lots. The one existing house and the barn that, or rather, the barn that's still there will be removed. And then the house and all the concrete pads and everything that are there are also being proposed to be removed. There's no direct wetland impacts with this application. We have upland review area impact of about 2 acres, which is mostly grading and clearing for the detention basins. There's a little bit of the house on lot 11, which is in the upland review area, and then the rear yards for lots 8, 9, and 10. And that is the extent of our upland review kind of impact. We have proposed very, very limited tree clearing on this site. I believe the only place that we've actually proposed it is for the infiltration level spreaders on that basin to the south there. Aside from that, the tree clearing and tree clearing limits, that was a major concern with the previous application. And so we paid special attention to that to try to make sure that we weren't clearing as many trees as possible so that there was no environmental impact as far as raising of temperature within the wetlands or water course, which was of concern because I guess this brook feeds a larger tributary which has a fish habitat. So there are no vernal pools on this site. David Lord, I believe, is here with us as well. So I'm going to let him go through all the direct wetland stuff. He can explain that. But I just want to touch base on that. And what we have done kind of in our process of meetings as well is we've gone through and kind of tried to fine tune some of the questions. So I'll go through some of the changes that we've made, some of the discussion that we've had, just so that once again, everybody from the public is kind of all caught up with everywhere that we're all at. So we have these 2 detention basins. Originally, the original plan proposed 1 very large detention basin, which was in the kind of southwest corner of the site, kind of tucked into that little wetland pocket. So what we did was we broke up this drainage area into 2 different smaller sub-regional drainage basins here. And what we did was we took that water and we diverted the site basically in half and split it up. In doing this, we were able to achieve a much smaller footprint of our basins and therefore reduce that upland impact and reduce the tree clearing as I had previously mentioned. So that's a big change from the previous application. And then with all of our discussions with the town staff and with the commission, we've also gone out and done deep test pits in the areas of these basins. We've monitored the groundwater in the original standpipes. And we've taken a look at all that information. We've gotten percolation tests done in the areas of these detention basins so that we could model potentially what infiltration would do on this site, which I'm going to let Bart Beauvais discuss in a little more detail. And so in all of these different things that we've done, we knew that these were type B soils based on the USDA soil maps, but we've kind of gone above and beyond what the normal kind of strategy here to really take a deep dive into this. We've made modifications to what the finished floors of the houses were going to be to raise things up in areas of concern based on the deep test pits that we had done, based on the monitoring reports, so that we made sure that there was gravity flow for any drains or footing drains on the buildings, so that there weren't going to be situations with sump pumps running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during the wet season. So those are all things that we have modified, all based on the recommendations of town staff, based on recommendations of commission members, and based on the previous application, the points of kind of contention or points of question and that came up. So at this point, I think I'll turn it over and I'll let maybe let Bart kind of discuss in a little bit of detail the drainage design for you guys, and then we'll have David Lord touch base on the wetlands as far as vernal pools go and kind of some of the stuff that we saw during the site walk as well.
Thank you. Everybody hear me all right? I apologize for the lighting in my old home office. It's not what it used to be, but yes, I'm a senior engineer at H.E. Cole & Sons. I'm a licensed in the state of Connecticut. I've got over 35 years of experience being a licensed engineer, and another 10 years prior to that working with an engineer who did a lot of drainage work. I've got a lot of experience in drainage. I've done a lot of work in Farmington. I've done work in a lot of central Connecticut towns, with my primary base being Berlin, Southington, New Britain area. This is a very unique property. And first of all, I hate to be remedial on this, but I should let the commission know that every drop of water, whether it's pre-existing or proposed on this site, goes to the north of the site into the property to the north. We're not changing the hydraulics. We're not adding any additional water into the site than presently exists. Now, an existing condition, probably 85% of that water is absorbed into the ground and affects the groundwater table. The rest of it falls into the brook, goes to the stormwater system and through the site. As we looked at this site and we were trying to come up with a way to deal with the water, what we tried to do was replicate the best we could pre-existing conditions. And to do that, we divided our watershed areas into two areas. There's an area to the west of the site, approximately 13.3 acres, that drains the existing brook that falls to the site. And then there's a second area just to the northwest of the site that flows into the wetlands. That's about 3 acres in size. And when we looked at the drainage within these areas, our goal was to take the development that we're proposing, try to control that flow into detention areas, and then discharge it into the wetlands areas. Again, most of the pre-existing water flows into the ground, and the groundwater affects the water table. Our charge was to take the water in the development areas, bring them into the detention areas. Those detention areas would hold back the water. We would hold back our peak flows, so our peaks do not exceed pre-development values, and then discharge it to the brook to the west. And when you look at our flows, we've basically decreased our flow off-site by about 10%, which means the surface water runoff that we're calculating post-development is less than the pre-development value. Now, where does that water go? I said, you know, your pre-development condition, you're going to have the same amount of water. Well, that water is going to be absorbed into the ground. It's going to run into the areas, and the wetlands is going to run around the houses. We've designed these detention areas so both are above the 100 or the high groundwater table. We've gone through and monitored these areas. We've done test pits. We've reconciled, because this property has been on the market for so long. Various surveys have elevations at different datums. We've reconciled the datums, and we know that our detention areas are above the high groundwater table, meaning that when these areas are drained and they're dry, we're not going to retain a wet bottom. So these are going to be basically dry basins, not wet basins. We're using outlet control structures on both the upper and the lower that go into a kind of a concrete infiltrator type system. So we're not discharging our flow overland, but we're trying to push it back into the ground. So we've minimized our disturbance into those areas. Those are those rectangles at the outlet control structures. There's a detail on the plan that shows how they construct those areas. I believe there are four 4-foot units aligned in those areas. So we're not looking to take that water and push that out through the wetlands, but we're trying to diffuse that as naturally as possible so that water will flow naturally through the upland review area and towards the wetland. I should also point out that we've divided our watersheds for both these ponds roughly evenly. It's about 2.5 acres for the southerly pond and 2.5 acres for the northerly pond. We're trying not to overtax each of these two areas significantly. So from a phasing standpoint, should the developer decide to go through and do the first few lots, then do the second few lots, he's able to at least build the first area with the drainage from those few lots heading into the detention area. And then as he gets further to the cul-de-sac, he can build that second pond. And again, that can be through. As Brian mentioned, we've taken pains to stay out of the wooded areas for tree clearing. We're working within open areas, so our work is going to have a minimal impact on vegetation, on tree clearing, on opening up the vegetation, so that we're introducing extra light and such back into the wetland. In all, generally, we're reducing our surface flows by about 10%. We've also, and as a matter of fact, when we design our detention basins, we do not look at infiltration initially. We want to make sure those detention basins work without infiltration. So for any chance those detention basins do not percolate, or there's problems in the winter and it's a frozen condition, we know those detention basins will function as designed. But when we looked at the runoff, we recognize that those detention basins were going to percolate some flow out. Rather, if it's sitting in there for 4 hours or 5 hours or 8 hours, the water is going to eventually percolate out through the bottom, and not all of it's going to go out through the pipe. So we've done percolation tests in each one of those areas to determine an infiltration rate for both of those basins, so we can at least model and have an estimate of how much water is actually leaving those areas. Per the Farmington regulations, we only use a 50% value for the infiltration rate, meaning we didn't take the best case scenario. We figured, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, if that ever clogs up, we're going to use a reduced value. And what we found was our overall water leaving the detention areas is going to be less volume than it's going to, than what's happening at the present time. Now, that water goes into the groundwater table. And I know that we've gotten letters, and there may be even some more testimony for people, especially north of the site, who have issues with ground or have issues with drainage. Unfortunately, I don't know what's caused those problems. It's talked about that, that could be high groundwater, but it could also be poor drainage around the foundation. It could be bad downspouts. It could be a bad sump pump. There's a lot of reasons. And I really feel for these people to the north. But in essence, we are not adding any more water from our site than happens today. What we're trying to do is control it. We've looked at options. Brian will discuss an option that the staff kind of threw at us in a little bit. But right now, we've tried to replicate as close as we could to existing conditions. Brian?
All right, thank you, Bart. Dave, I don't know if you're on the call. If you're able, you want to discuss a little bit about these wetlands in particular, maybe go through some of the quality of the wetlands, some of the stuff that you found. There was discussion and question about vernal pools. If you could maybe touch base on that.
Sure, be very happy to. Can everyone hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Good evening. For the record, my name is David Lord. I'm a professional soil scientist and environmental consultant with Soil Resource Consultants of Meriden, Connecticut. I have looked at this property since 2013 over the years. I could probably walk most of it with a blindfold, other than because of the vegetation that's grown up on it, that could be very difficult to do. What I'm leading to is that the site has not significantly changed over that period of time. The soils are the same. The inland wetland boundaries are the same. The upland review zone in certain areas that were open fields back in 2014 have grown up considerably, increasing the density of the vegetation, making it in some cases where you have to cut your way through foot by foot through what has grown into a very dense shrub layer. The inland wetland report and the function and values reports, which were submitted for the initial application and were looked at for this application and submission, I have not changed. My opinion of the character and the functioning of the wetland and watercourse on this site have not changed. They're levels of functioning have not changed over time. They still provide the same levels of functioning that they did and were described in my 2014 report. Additional studies that have been completed this year, requested by the commission, the vernal pool studies. I've looked at the wetlands on this property in 2019, 2020, and 2021 in the spring period of time from late March to early June of those years, performing roughly 6 individual site inspections and walkthrough to search for obligate vernal pool species. I found no evidence of any vernal pool obligate species in any of the wetlands or along the water course on this property. That finding was somewhat substantiated by the previous peer review letter, which stated that in September of 2015, they did not find any adult species that could be considered obligate species within the upland portions of the site near the on-site wetland areas. If anyone has questions as I'm presenting this, feel free to jump in and ask the questions. The second study that I added to this is a wildlife inventories compilation. Now, this is based on habitat type. There's a lot of research that's been done on what species can be found based on habitat type. Overall, wildlife studies take a year or more to do a actual species count inventory type. The habitat type inventories are generally the standard that are used today for this type of information that the applicants may need to present to a particular municipality. You have that in the application package. And I think with that, I'm going to conclude what I have to say at this particular time. And at the appropriate time, I'll be happy to try to answer any questions that the members have. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Hey, Bruce, if we could switch over to the slide that shows the overlay of the original plan that was proposed and this new one. So just to kind of talk a little bit about that original plan as it came up in a lot of the correspondence and has come up with town staff and in the past at some of our other meetings. So in this image here, you can see our color rendering of the site, which you had seen before. And now you can see this kind of in this bluish color, bluish greenish color is what the extents of the site and the disturbance, or rather the layout of the site was for that previous application. So roughly the same location where the road comes in both our new proposal and the old proposal. But what you'll notice is the biggest difference is the alignment of the road. This being a cluster subdivision, you're required to have less area. And what the original application had done was still left relatively large lots. And what that did was it essentially pushed the road just ever so slightly to the west, and therefore closer to the wetlands and the upland review area, and so therefore had more upland disturbance. You'll also notice that in comparison, we also have one less lot. There was a point of question as to the small point of wetlands that kind of juts out towards just south of that northern detention basin. Bruce is on there right now. And so without having any impact or any potential impact to that, we looked at it and said, all right, well, if we eliminate this lot altogether, that's a much better area for us to put that detention basin. It allows us to separate, as Bart had talked about, this larger watershed area into separate it into a more natural flow, breaking it up into the two. And by shifting the road over and actually doing essentially what the point of this cluster of a cluster subdivision is, which is to reduce the total area that all the houses use, force them into a smaller footprint, and therefore keep more natural open space. We were able to fit the detention basin into that area just to the west of the houses without clearing, without too much impact to the tree canopy, and overall, in our opinion, a better plan. We also noticed that, like on lot 1, for example, or on our lot 11 rather, roughly the house is roughly in the same location. Yes, we may be closer to the road ever so slightly, but it's still roughly the same location from the wetlands. But the actual amount of land that is in the upland review, we've reduced that by making that lot smaller. And so you can also see where that proposal, as we had kind of earlier discussed, the earlier proposal, where that basin is. And you'll also notice that our basin, roughly size-wise, we almost have 2 basins. We're doubling the size. And that's because that original proposal had basins that were much deeper. We have very shallow basins. These are very natural. They'll be very easy to maintain. And by doing that, we have a lot more surface area in the bottom of those basins. And the more surface area that you have, that promotes infiltration, that the more area that waters can infiltrate into the ground. So as Bart had kind of discussed a little bit earlier, it was brought and raised, the question was raised, there is a lot of concern about water and runoff, can we make these basins larger? And we had taken a quick look at it. We've sketched something up. Once again, the proposal, the plan that we've presented to you in the past, that we've kind of already shown you earlier tonight, that we're showing you right now, this plan meets all of the regulations. The basins work, they're sized properly. We have 0 increase in runoff. Bart has discussed, we've reduced the actual volume of runoff from the site based on infiltration. But in the event that, there's still some question or you think that it would be prudent to make these basins larger, to have more infiltration area, we have put together a sketch of what that might look like, and I've kind of come up with some numbers. So Bruce, if you can skip ahead to that. So, and once again, I tried to, when sketching this up, we tried to do this in a manner that was like as little impact, once again, as we can. So the basin to the north is, I'll say, the easier of the 2. It's already cleared. Yes, we're in the upland review, so we're going to have more upland disturbance, but we can make it larger without any substantial increase to clearing or anything else. So currently, that northern basin has about 6,000 square feet of bottom. And so that bottom being the area that can infiltrate. If we were to make this a little bit larger, roughly by about 1/3, we can make it almost 10,000 square feet. 9,760 square feet is shown in that kind of red outline, kind of overlaying the basin there. The southern basin right now is 7,180 square feet at the bottom. By jutting this out, we can make it roughly 11,100 square feet. And even in this basin on the south, we still are maintaining an offset of over 100 feet from wetlands. So I kind of took that wetland line, and obviously in the pink there, that dashed line is the 150-foot upland review line. If you take that and you make that 100-foot upland review, this basin in this design in the south there would still be outside of 100 feet from the wetland. So there would be less than that. Once again, this isn't something that's necessarily being required. It's not something that anybody has said you have to do this. We just wanted to do this as an exercise in the event that you feel like we need to be infiltrating more water or storing more water, as just an option moving forward for consideration. So I believe at this time, just to kind of reiterate the key points in addressing a lot of the concerns before we go to questions or go to comment from public. As Bart has said, we are we understand the situations and the problems that may be occurring offsite, but we want to make it very clear that we feel like not only is this design meeting all of the regulations, but now we've gone very, very, very much above and beyond what even the normal kind of requirements are with all these subdivisions that we're doing in Farmington. And we understand the problem, we understand the concerns, and we feel for the neighbors, but we want to make sure that everybody understands that this project will not be creating or exacerbating a problem that already exists. We will not be having any further impact to those properties with these designs.
And if I can just build on what Brian said, the theory with enlarging the detention bases, those of you familiar with hydrographs, it's time over peak volume. Simplistically, a lot of people use the rational method, which is basically a V peak, and you figure out the area below the peak or below the curve, and that's your volume of water that you store. We use the conservation service method on this, which is a lot more realistic from the standpoint of determining how much volume it has. Instead of a V, we've got more of a bell curve. The theory with the larger detention areas is we would flatten that bell curve down, and we'd allow that water to sit longer within the detention areas, and then we'd adjust our outlet control structure for the smaller openings, so we could then kind of neck down the volumes. So our volumes are going to be reduced a little bit more. Now, two things. Number one, we keep water within those detention ponds longer. I'm not talking 2 or 3 days. I'm talking maybe from 6 hours to 12 hours to 18 hours. That's yet to be determined. But from the standpoint of flows, we could reduce our net output, so we would minimize the amount of water going from us on the surface system and discharging into the surface drains to the north. The downside is by putting more area, you're going to create more infiltration. And that infiltration, again, is going to help reduce our flows, but it's also going to determine the groundwater, which is part of the reason why we went with the plan that we did. We wanted to kind of balance flows and groundwater and detention. If this commission feels that having a larger detention area, and we kind of work with staff kind of came up with this as an option, and we felt like we should at least present it at the public hearing. You know, we can help reduce the surface flows, but that water's got to go someplace. That water's not going to go uphill into Avon. It's going to go to the north of this site. So we originally, and what we presented, we felt was the best case scenario to balance surface water and groundwater infiltration. If the commission feels that a bigger basin is necessary and we can somehow reduce the amount of peak flow within that area, we'd be more than comfortable to revise our plans and provide that. I'm done.
So I guess if there's any questions from commission members at this time, or we can address those, or if the commission would rather, you know, open to public comment and hear any of the public comment, we can do that.
Yeah, just my general take on it, if other commission members agree with this, and hopefully they do, is we've had some public hearings where the public has been up past everybody's bedtime before they were able to ask any questions or make any statements, things of that nature, even though, I mean, technically they can't ask the questions. But I would prefer to go ahead and have the public actually go ahead and, you know, make whatever comments they have onto the record, so that we can do that. And then we'll follow up with questions that the commissioners may have. So, I mean, if any of the other commission members don't like that idea, let me know now, or forever hold your peace with it.
I think that's fine.
Okay.
This is Mark. I agree with that approach.
So what I would like to do is we'll start opening this up to the public. I guess, Bruce, you've got your thumb on the switch on this, but I want people to please state their name, spell at least the last name, and provide their address so that we have that for the record. So Bruce, we'll go ahead and we'll open it up to the public for their comments.
All right, just a reminder to everybody, there's a raise hand function in Zoom. So if you just use that, we'll actually call on you as we go. All right, and just don't forget to give us your name and your address before you start. All right, first person we have is Jose Ruiz. You can go ahead and talk.
Hello, my name is Jose Ruiz. Last name is Ruiz. I'm at 20 Whispering Rod Road. I would like to first thank the commission for the opportunity to talk about this proposal. I appreciate the sentiment from Mr. Cole. The people I have presented regarding the proposal that they make, and I don't question, their efforts to, make sure that, the impact of the proposal is not detrimental. However, when I look at this proposal and when it was superimposed and compared to the one from 2014, yes, it's different. But there's a lot of things that are still the same, starting with the fact that we went from 12 houses, which, 7 years ago, it was indicated that was quite a number of houses. We just reduced it to one. I'm also concerned in the past, there's in this year in the hearings, the indication that there's still a plan to raise the houses considerably. I don't know if it's the same amount that it was proposed 7 years ago, which I believe it was like 20 feet from current. It hasn't been mentioned, or at least I've missed that. There's a concern with that. And again, I know that, the companies that are looking at this, they're trying to minimize the impact, but man versus nature, we could try to replicate as much as we can nature. Maybe in the short run that might work, but I'm worried about the long term. The basins that are being proposed, kind of make sense, but I would like to recall a comment that was made during the September 1st hearing, where a question of maintenance of those basins, which tonight it's been mentioned that they're easy to maintain, but the question was raised on September 1st of who was going to be maintaining that. I was a bit disappointed that the applicant at the time indicated, well, that should be the town. That follows a pattern that we saw 7 years ago, where when asked about, who should take responsibility for a number of things, including, future house owners, taking down trees in the wetlands area, it's like, well, that should be somebody else. In this case, with regards to the basins, again, on September 1st, the suggestion was made like, well, the town should take care of that. Well, somebody eventually needs to take care of that. And that's the concern, even if it's well planned now, down the road, it's not nature, it's going to be something that it's man-made. And how do we know with certainty, in 10 years, 15 years that those man-made structures are still going to continue and perform the same as nature. With all of that, I would like to respectfully express my opposition to this proposal. And again, thank you to the commission for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for taking the time to do it.
All right, the next person. Next person we have is Elizabeth Norwood. You can go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you very much for allowing me a few moments. My name is Elizabeth Norwood. My husband Michael and I have lived at 35 Silversmith Road for the past 18 years. I have taken the time to review the plans, and I, as a scientist, understand and accept that the people who have prepared these plans strongly believe that their plans are for the best for the for the development and for the neighborhood. But I'm going to speak to you after 18 years of experience of the water that stands in my yard, not only on dry years, but wet years. Even today, as we speak, there's a pothole between my driveway and the corner of Silversmith and Redcoat Lane that still has standing water. And my concern is that the elevation at the corner of Redcoat and Silversmith, which is at the northwest corner of the copper mine property in question here, has an elevation difference of just 2 feet between the wetlands and the sanitary sewer as marked on the applicant's plans and proposed plans. I can't tell you if it's groundwater or if it's runoff water or if it's an infiltration problem. All I can tell you is that we constantly have standing water, and I cannot in good conscience not say anything and stay quiet, because what recourse do I have if I allow this development to go up and then my property, and worse, my home, is rendered not livable because the water continues to flow? We have horrible, horrible experiences in this neighborhood. This neighborhood probably should not have been built, but now we have figured out how to deal with it. We've paid for sump pumps and for all sorts of manipulations to our land to improve dry runoff. There's at least a dozen homes that are directly affected that border this property, and I am here to vehemently oppose it. And I ask you to consider the well-being of our homes in this neighborhood to put them before the possibility of bringing in more homes to the detriment of ours. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Also, there's people using the chat. We don't use the chat online, just to let everybody, just to remind everybody. Next one we have is a ringuet. So sorry for that, if I'm not saying it correctly.
Yeah, hi, this is Tim Ringuet. Everybody hear me okay, I guess?
Yep.
RINGUETTE 17 Whispering Rod Road. So I kind of have a number of questions and kind of concerns, and I'll just skip with all the pleasantries and all that stuff and just jump to it so it don't take too long. So my first major concern is kind of overall, obviously there's a study by hydrologists and stuff of how the water will flow out of the property. I'm a little concerned that we are kind of given the assurance that it will not affect the neighboring properties, but at the same time, the expert then says, well, I'm not really sure why the other neighboring properties are flooding. To make the assumption that it's some sort of drainage problem off of roofs or something like that, or foundation problems with the neighboring properties, is just absurd. Anybody that goes through the area and experiences the flooding knows that that is absurd. So it kind of causes me to question the rest of the assumptions made by the overall analysis of the property. So that's just kind of a general thing. Then the next was kind of basically in terms of the detention basins. Essentially, where does the discharge go? I mean, I know where it goes. There's 4 outlets that we talked about. That need to be maintained to flow the water away from the general area. But just thinking in general terms, it seems like you're taking the rain discharge from a large area and funneling it into 4 areas. So overall, maybe your volume is the same per area, but now you're putting into 4 discharge areas. So how does that means a higher flow per area? How does that get handled, and what effect does that have on the surrounding areas? Especially when you already have a high water table, and so that water is not going to just kind of seep into the ground and infiltrate. So another question was questions from the last time, like what changed, we don't need to go into this now, but from the last time, as Jose had said, there was a definite rejection of the 12 houses, and I believe it was down to 7 or 6. I can't remember, maybe it was 8, I don't know, but previously, there was a large reduction in the number of houses. What questions were there from that plan caused that reduction, and have those been answered to the degree needed to make an 11-house development okay. So that's a question I don't know the answer to. I'll echo Steve's question there in the question center of my neighbor of who's responsible for the maintenance. I believe there are other areas that were planned, kind of flood control areas and drainage areas that have not been maintained historically. So who's responsible for it, and then who is liable for it as well? Is there a discourse? If there's a problem, what do the people on Whispering Rod do to say, hey, how come our backyards are even worse than they were before? So, and then the last one was just a kind of a general question of, it kind of raises a bit of alarm in my head to just say that overall the effect on all of the neighboring properties will be nothing, but it's a good idea for the properties built on this land or the houses built on this land to be raised up to prevent any flooding problems. So it's kind of just a strange thing of like, if we know there's water and drainage issues in this area, and it seems to be a good thing to raise the houses on this development, but don't worry, everybody surrounding it, you'll be totally fine. We've got it under control. So that's just kind of a general question I had that kind of raises a little bit of alarm bells in my head. So that was the end of my questions and comments. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Next one we have is Bill Bartuka. You good?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Bill.
I just had to find the unmute button. Okay, so I too agree with a lot of the statements that have been made on behalf of my neighbors. Well, can you hear me?
Yeah, excuse me, Bill, if you could just give us your address.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bill Bartuca, that's B as in boy, Artucca, and I live at 50 Redcoat Lane.
Thank you.
Thank you for the reminder.
No problem.
Okay, I too agree with a lot of the neighbors as to the likely results in the water issues. So requesting denial of the development on the grounds it will result in additional water problems for the adjacent property owners over time, whether it's short or long term. And that is, from my perspective, is going to be a function of the effectiveness or not of the design. Okay, and there's a number of risk factors that I highlighted relative to a lot of what has been said, and we certainly have some people on the line with very good credentials, and it certainly sounds like a fair amount of due diligence was done as well. But there are still risk factors that contain some uncertainty, and the uncertainty will be borne out by the adjacent property owners, and they're going to bear the risk of burden of any negative outcomes, which include financial impact and any investment to repair problems that precipitate from what is taking place. So I just want to highlight some of the points of risk. Risk number one is the design itself, and it looks like a fair amount of work has been done on that, but there is still some uncertainty. So maybe that risk factor is a little lower than the others. There's the risk factor of the build, and the build is the contractor going in there and actually implementing the design he or she's been presented with. Meaning, if they take shortcuts, then they could essentially disengage the effectiveness of the design, and that's a risk. There's already been mentioned the maintenance, the periodic maintenance that has to be done to maintain the effectiveness of the design and build. And at some point in time, maybe even having to refurbish the design over time because of its degradation. All those risk factors, if anything is of a negative outcome, it appears that the adjacent property owners are bearing that risks. So the net of it is, at the best case, there will be a zero impact. And at the worst case, there could be a graduated progression of financial impact. So the uncertainty is borne by the adjacent property owners, unless somebody else is stepping up to the liability, which I don't think so. So with that said, thank you for the opportunity to present a property owner's assessment And I yield the floor back to the meeting.
Right, thank you. Next one we have is Eric O'Keefe.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. My name is Eric O'Keefe. My wife is Jackie O'Keefe. We're both here. We live at 44 Redcoat Lane. And a few points that I want to bring up. I've listened to all of the non-public hearings so far this year, and I do want to thank the commission for all their time and consideration. And to everybody else that's spoken tonight with their proposals, Brian Burt and David, thank you for all the time and work that you've put in. There's one glaring thing that I've taken away from all of the hearings so far. And I think that the commission's role is to protect the wetlands and to also look out for the existing property owners and the vested interests that are in the neighborhood. The reality of it is that if we could go back to the 60s and go before the Wetlands Commission, none of these homes should have been built. They have a lot of water problems existing around in the areas now. In listening to these commission meetings so far this year, I really wanted to hear some very important things that I haven't heard. I've seen design changes, things that look good, like we're working very studiously on the problems. But the big problem for me is the fact that we're using the wrong language for the vested interests for the people around in the surrounding properties. We're talking about pushing and moving water. Looking at the picture so you can understand my particular interest is I'm the house in the northwest corner. I have the pool, the in-ground pool. Like many of the landowners around here, we have water table issues and stuff that has been stated by everybody in the proposal that is not their problem and not their concern. We have high water. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to describe it, but we have a pool and the pool has a floating liner with a brand new pool liner put into it. We have monetary loss from water issues in our neighborhood. Now we're staring down the barrel of the gun in our house because I believe as Brian or Bert said earlier that with about 85% of the existing resorption going, 15% moving into existing drainage, the verbiage is that we are minimizing, we shouldn't have an impact. Hopefully things aren't going to happen. That's not the verbiage that we need. And that's not what our city wetlands commission councils should be doing. They should be protecting the people that have vested interests already. And when we're talking about moving water and we're talking about affecting the surrounding properties, would, should, couldn't, hopefully, all of those words, which have been said by all of our experts, realistically is not a high enough threshold to move forward with this project. I don't see how shouldn't, couldn't, hope, and things like that, using passive intent verbiage, that's just not a threshold for determining the surrounding property values, communities, and impact on the wetland environment around us. So I appreciate everybody's time and work and due diligence and all the planning and stuff that's gone on. But unfortunately, I don't see how we've made a threshold at all for this to even be this far along in the process through the hearings. I mean, would, could, and should gives no guarantees towards the livelihoods of the existing community members in the future. So I appreciate everybody. I appreciate the time speaking, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right, at this time, I don't see anybody else, so I'll call it out again. If anyone wishes to speak, please just raise your hand using the Zoom function. Nothing. I'll call it again. Anyone wishes to speak, please hit the zone, raise your hand here. Here we go. And we have a Mr. Edward Leary. So go ahead, you can. You can unmute yourself, Ed.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Leary. I'm Ed's wife. We live at 19 Whispering Rod Road. And you have received a letter already, but I have a couple of other questions. When this Rosemary Way cul-de-sac is plowed, where's the snow gonna go? Hello? Oh.
You address your questions to the chair, address any and all questions to the chair, and then the commission or the applicant will address them when you're finished.
Okay. Then I would like to make a general statement. That's not a question. The rock wall that borders the property, Mr. Bemis's property that runs from Copper Mine almost all the way to Whispering Rod Road on the east side. There's a wall that separates Mr. Bemis's lot from 168 Copper Mine. Behind lot number 6, there is a beautiful, majestic maple tree growing out of the wall. Mr. Bemis and I measured the circumference of that tree at 10.5 feet, which is, it's just magnificent. And when we did that, I was struck by the visualization of the huge amount of water this tree and the natural vegetation absorb from the land. I'm pretty sure that this developer is going to come in and decimate the natural vegetation, making it a wasteland, just as he has done with the Wisteria Lane cul-de-sac and the Tan Bark development. I don't know how you can build all these houses without knocking down all the trees and vegetation. That is my statement. Thank you very much.
I'll respond to your comment about the trees. One of the things that is typically looked at, but it's more of a planning and zoning issue, is specimen trees. And if the circumference of this tree is in fact like 10.5 feet, Shannon, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've talked about this in the past. I think this more than qualifies for a specimen tree. So that's something that over the years I've been on this commission, we've tended to try to keep those things in place because they are rare. So we do try to maintain them. But I think that's well over the threshold, isn't it, Shannon?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chair.
Okay. And then if the applicant wants to address the issue of snow, I mean, we haven't gotten to that point yet, but it's a question that has been asked a number of times by commission members. So may want to just quickly comment on that. I mean, I've got an idea where it's going to go because my neighborhood's a small cul-de-sac and I have to plow out some of the road every time it snows. So, but if they may want to address that.
Brian, do you want to comment?
Sure. Is there any other, just for the interest of kind of time here, is there any other public comment or?
As at this point, that's it. That's all we have. But I'll do a last roll call after we're done.
Sure. So this is going to be, just want to touch base. So this is a town-owned, maintained road. We are proposing this as a town road. So I can tell you that, you know, the snow is going to be plowed one way, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hannon. But as you said, you know, the gentleman from the town who decides to actually plow this is going to put it where he wants to put it. You know, this is, like I said, a town road. We do have shoulder here. We have an area where they're going to come down one side of the road, push all the snow off the pavement along. They're probably going to plow some of it straight into the end of the cul-de-sac in between that driveways. But, you know, once again, this isn't a private road where we're talking about, you know, okay, well, we want, you know, them to move it to another off-site, to another location, or there's any special treatment going to be happening on this road versus any other town road. So, and I think also, just because, you know, I was hearing a lot, and I just want to confirm with staff, as far as public hearing and all of this, a lot of this discussion, maybe we could clarify just a little bit of how much of this public hearing, wetlands related public hearing versus how we'll be going through and doing the, and answering a lot of these other questions at planning and zoning as well, just so no one from the public feels as though, you know, we're trying to inadvertently like avoid a topic. It's just that we're trying to be more focused on just the wetlands portion of this at this time.
And just from a technical perspective, our sole view is the wetlands and what we have both in terms of local regulations as well as state statutes. So this is a two-part process where wetlands is one process, planning and zoning is another, and there are issues that we can consider that they don't, and there are issues they consider which we can't. So it is a two-step process.
All right, I've got Eric O'Keefe would like to talk again. Go ahead.
Good evening. This is actually Jackie O'Keefe. I am Eric's wife. I just wanted to make some statements just to help everyone understand the severity of the water issue that we have at our home and at our neighbors' homes. Like my husband pointed out earlier, you can actually see our swimming pool and backyard at that top northwest corner of the picture here. The swimming pool is roughly 30 years old. We just had the liner redone last year because it had been floating. There is a significant amount of groundwater that continues to push the liner up. So we've been having to remedy that. Recently, we just had the whole thing relined. And once we opened up the cover this past summer, we had noticed that the entire liner had once again floated to the surface. The amount of pressure from the ground that is able to push up that kind of water is immense. And I'd like to have you understand something, what I'm talking about here. Where the liner was pulling up was in the shallow end. So the groundwater, the water table was just about 1 foot underneath where we were standing on the grass. When this pool was built about 30 years ago, from what we understand, speaking to the pool company that used to service the pool, this land was dry. Now the company that comes out to help service the pool said, there's no way in hell anyone would ever put an in-ground pool on this property with the amount of water that we have. It's just absolutely obscene. I'd also like to point out that everyone on our street just about does own a generator, not so that we can enjoy some you know, ice cream and air conditioning in the summer when we lose power, but because of all of our sump pumps. If we lose power for just a little bit, all of our basements are flooded and they go off constantly. I can't speak for all of my neighbors, but I can certainly tell you about my own home. We have 2 pumps in the basement. A very significant amount of money was put into this system, and the pumps do go off day, all night, and it doesn't matter if it's raining, if it's the wet season or the dry season. We have a major water problem on our property, and my husband and I and our neighbors all agree, we just cannot understand how building this property, all of these properties over here to the east, is going to, I mean, maybe it'll stay the same the way it is, but obviously we're having more and more water issues. It's getting worse and worse every year. How are you going to convince us or guarantee us that what you are doing here or suggesting isn't going to make our situation worse? I do have one other point apparently have a scientist here with us tonight. Forget the gentleman's name. He was commenting on the soil. You mentioned something about vernal pools and the animals that live in those vernal pools, and that he had not found any evidence of those. I could be wrong, so this is my question, but from what I understand, snapping turtles, which I've heard from Brenda Betcher, who is the animal control officer for the town of Farmington, did mention to me that they are actually protected. We're not allowed to touch them or move them or anything like that, but they do reside in that water property just behind our yard. And we know that because the adult females wander into our yard every season. We actually find some of their little hatchlings in our pool that we have to rescue from time to time. So I'd ask, I think it sounds like someone has to do a little bit more of due diligence to find some of those creatures that are living back there that deserve to be protected. And thank you for your time. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
David, did you want to address that as far as the snapping turtle?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Snapping turtles are protected in the state of Connecticut. You're not allowed to do as Mrs. O'Keefe said. They are not, though, a recognized vernal pool obligate species. So while they are present, obviously they're present in a lot of places, but they are not a vernal pool or wetland associated species. So that's the reason they were not described in my earlier presentation, because they're not vernal pool related species.
So Bruce, are there any more people?
Nope, I'm just looking at it right now. I don't see anybody else. We'll call out again. If anyone wants to speak, please use the raise hand function on Zoom. Going once. Going twice. All right, there's no more. You can go ahead, Chair. But
Okay, so roll it over to commission members. So Ned, we've been sticking with you at the start today, so I'll start with you again on this one.
I don't, the science behind, how the water is going to drain and where the water is going to go. I mean, I'm a civil engineer, and I had Q equals CIA courses and all that, but it doesn't always work out the way it's anticipated. So I am a little concerned about putting some of the people in the area at risk. But the other concern I had on this was, I live close by. I live on Bella Lane, and there is a lot of wildlife in here. And this wetland corridor is also a wildlife corridor. And I have bears and deer, and I see them crossing on Coppermine, and they're go from yard to yard in Bella Lane, and so I am a little concerned about losing a wildlife corridor in here that the wetlands corridor is providing. And I don't know if maybe that, well, I can see that they did a lot of work going from 12 houses to 11 houses, but maybe they need to lose a couple more in order to keep the corridor as something that can be useful to wildlife and keep the distance a little bit further from the wetlands. But I do think they did a lot of work and a lot of effort went into this. I'm just not sure it's there yet, but that's all I have for questions.
Okay, Mark?
I look at this project as it's not something I would prefer that they do, but I see the work they did on this and how they've done it to minimize the effect on the wetlands and what they've done to try to control the water. I don't foresee this as being something that's going to adversely affect the neighborhood. The neighborhood is already affected by what was done many years ago, and I don't perceive this project making the situation any worse. Talking about the corridor, I live on a street that was farmland, and the back of me is 50 acres of farmland, and I can tell you about animals. They've been crossing certain parts of the land for years. They continue to cross that land. I have coyotes, bobcats, and bears constantly going through my yard, and it's only because they've done it forever, and that's what they do. So I understand about taking away some habitat that sounds like they don't live there. That it sounds like they pass through it. So I would think they would continue to do so, and I don't think they'd be hindered. It seems to be that wildlife has now learned how to adapt. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Neil?
I guess I'm concerned, and I do appreciate that there's been a lot of work in this, in an attempt to minimize the impact on the external neighborhoods. But I guess I'm concerned with some of the comments and the public comments and the letters that we've been receiving. And I don't fully understand, and I don't know if anybody understands what's causing those problems. And some of those problems seem to be getting worse. I know we're trying to design something here that is not going to have an adverse impact, and maybe it won't. But there's also the possibility in my mind that because we don't understand what's causing the problem today, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road, those problems are going to be significantly worse. And that's one thing I'm struggling with on this project. I do have a question though, going back to the maintenance on the retaining ponds, or the basins, whatever the technical term is for them. There was some talk about maintenance, and how often do those need to be maintained? How are they maintained? And when they're maintained, what does that do to the surrounding area? And does it change the water flows at all as that happens? And that's all I have.
What were you going to say, Bruce?
No, I was gonna say, sorry, I think I actually jumped over you. I was gonna see if Brian wanted to answer that. I apologize. Itchy, trigger finger.
So yeah, I mean, you could talk about, maybe it'll help to kind of go through a couple of these things at a time so we don't lose track, but from a maintenance perspective, what we had done in this design, and Bart, feel free to kind of chime in with any of your additional thoughts. I know you've been doing this a little bit longer than I have, but our design here was basically, and we've done this in the past, Bruce and Shannon can attest to some of the other designs that we've done, where we've done really complex basins. We've included, pilot channels, 4 bays, these kind of extended 4-bay systems, almost like a inclusionary wetland inside of a basin itself. These basins are designed basically to just be grass basins. We had a lot of discussion with staff, a lot of discussion, and I know David Lord can attest to this. He said it to me countless times. I would love to see the bottom of this basin with, water in it and wetland plants, because it would thrive, but dig it deep enough so that you're into the groundwater, plant it with wetland plants, it'd be great. But the concern was, we want dry detention basins. Nobody wants mosquitoes. And so we basically took a basin, we checked the groundwater elevation, checked for modeling, we made sure we were above it, we tested the perk rate, made sure it would drain, And now it's just basically a grass depression in the ground that just needs to be, mowed once a year, twice a year. And, you check the outlet control structure, make sure that there's nothing blocking it, nothing clogging the trash rack. It's a very simple, straightforward process. In the event that, something somehow completely blocks the trash rack on the basin and the outlet and no water can get, out through that outlet control structure, if there's an emergency spillway, water increases up high enough to get to that point, it's going to go over this riprap spillway and drain back down into the wetlands. Meanwhile, all the while that thing is filling up, it is still infiltrating water. So this is when we say like this is very little maintenance. That's kind of all there is to it. There's riprap for water quality there. Every maybe 5 years, that riprap starts to get clogged with sediment. Maybe you have to clean the sediment out of the riprap. Bottom of the pond may have sediment in it. You have to clean that out. That's a regular kind of maintenance measure. I understand a lot of the neighbors talking about concerns with other basins in the vicinity, other basins in town. That's not, something that our office is aware of, nor is it something our office can correct or handle. That would, I guess, be more of a question for Bruce and Shannon and whatever the Public Works Department, however all of that works, and these people can field their questions there at a later date. We certainly understand all the concerns. I think that there's a misunderstanding of, when people keep saying, and I heard it a couple times from some of the members of the public said it, and I know Neil, you just brought it up. It's not that we don't know what's causing the problems for the neighbor. There's a whole variety of things that could be causing the problem for the neighbors. And as a matter of fact, I think in quite a bit of the correspondence, at least all these letters that we've received, I think all but maybe one of them mentioned that everybody who lives in these neighborhoods felt as though they never should have been built because they were built on a swamp. And so when you build on a swamp, there's water. Everybody knows what a swamp is. It's groundwater. The high groundwater table rises. You end up with very wet conditions all surrounding it. We understand that all of these houses may have been built in an area. If you look at the mapping, if you look at the wetland mapping, the historical stuff, you'll see, yes, that all was originally wetlands. I know that, I believe it was Mrs. O'Keefe or someone, if I'm incorrectly speaking, but the pool issue, you can see on our survey, the brook runs right there. That is perhaps, the wetlands run right there. At some point in time, that entire portion of road was probably all wetlands. We understand that there's these problems. We feel for the neighbors. We're not trying to do something that's going to make it worse. But and Bruce and Shannon, correct me if I'm wrong, but the requirement of the town of Farmington is that we have to meet zero. We're zero increase in runoff. We've taken that requirement, said, okay, our original design met zero. The original design, I think, from Kratzer and Jones on the original sub plan met zero. We've taken that and we've gone a step further and said, okay, let's not only meet zero, let's check and see what the volume of runoff off the site is. We've done analysis on that. Let's check and see the area of the basins. Let's see what the perk rates are. Let's see what all these things do. Let's see if we take these ponds and we infiltrate, a realistic amount of water, what the volume of runoff on site is. So when we say we don't foresee there any issues from this property affecting any of these people, it's because we've taken all of the science that we can and used all these programs that we have at our disposal, and we've modeled the 100-year storm. And we look at that 100-year storm and we say, okay, with the infiltration rate cut in half because it's winter or something, or the infiltration rate cut in half because it's been 2 big storms in a row and it's just not infiltrating quite as quickly as it normally would, or there's some sediment in the bottom of the basin. we take those numbers and we ran it back through our program. And yes, the volume of water leaving the site was reduced. So we've gone kind of above and beyond even what the town requirements are to try to sit here and make everybody as comfortable as possible with the fact we can't correct any existing problems. You know, any work, if we leave this site alone, no houses get built, no development gets built, nothing gets done, those problems are still going to exist. It's not because of this site that those problems exist. All we can do from our perspective is say, what can we do to do our best due diligence to make sure that nothing that we're doing on this site is going to negatively impact any of these neighbors any more than whatever happened when this property was built in the very beginning. So with that being said, unfortunately, I can't sit there and tell you house by house what the best remediative measure would be, for every single house all the way around the outside. All I can say is with all the information that we've gathered, all of the study that we've done, all the modeling that our software has done, that we've gone through and done, we are not negatively impacting any of these properties from our best judgment.
And if I could just put my 2 cents in, Brian did a very good job of summing up impacts. One thing that hasn't been discussed, and I'll mention the E&S plan that we proposed. Those detention basins are very critical in silt collection and storage during construction. So often you've got a large perimeter area with fence and no real means to collect it other than silt fence or maybe a double silt fence and hay bale. Those detention areas will do a lot of collection. It's been my experience that most of the disruptive action during construction, or during a development phase, is during the construction, where the sediment gets into the brook, the sediment gets into the structures, the sediment helps block that. It's a little disconcerting that Mrs. Larry talked about her pool, that it was 30 years before there was no water problem, and 30 years later they've got a water problem. I'm kind of curious to see how that happened. Maybe it was a downstream blockage or something like that that's caused that water to back up. But without development on this property, there's no real reason why I can see, at least initially, why you would have a problem 30 years building up in the fact, unless it was downstream, maybe where sediments kind of collected through those off the road and found its way through there. So I think the importance of those detention basins as part of our sedimentation plan for collection of sediment, obviously those areas will get cleaned and they'll be refurbished prior to construction, but it's very important. You'll notice they kind of run along the length of development. So with that and the combination of cutoff swales directing water into those areas, we're going to do a good job of protecting those wetland areas during construction. And I would even go so far, even though it hasn't been discussed, that I would suggest a very aggressive reporting and monitoring of those wetland areas, so none of that sediment leaves the site and gets into the brook. I think that'll go a long way to minimizing the risk that some of these neighbors have talked about, because it's, in my mind, the construction phase is probably the worst phase for the adjacent wetlands, because the wetlands are going to rehabilitate themselves after construction, and whatever's left in the ground is what's going to happen. So I think with proper monitoring and those sedimentation basins, we're going to go a long way to reduce potential for any degradation of that brook and wetland.
And to kind of go even further with that, we have discussed that with staff, Bruce and Shannon, already, that there will be monitoring requirements for this site, that they will have to, that we will be out there monitoring it and reporting back to town staff regularly, so that we can make sure that there aren't any negative impacts to these wetlands. And I think we also had even discussed that, so obviously those basins get constructed first. They're like the last barrier defense, constructing other measures in front of those so that those don't just get filled in with sediment, that they get protected even during construction as well. So, from a kind of long-term perspective, this plan does a very good job of protecting the wetlands. We, you know, once again, if the water and, you know, kind of detaining and storing more of that water on site is an issue, then, you know, that's why we had kind of presented this second alternative. You know, it also came up as far as all of the, you know, and we kind of went into this a little bit with the, you know, previous application, the concerns about, you know, impacts to the upland review. You know, if we do this, because, you know, that's a concern, we can certainly make these basins larger. Yes, it would require some more tree clearing in the area of the upland review area, but, you know, it's certainly an option.
Chair, if you don't mind if I just interject for a second?
Go ahead, Bruce.
Just so everyone knows, we had in our comments, we had that listed as we did not want those detention basins to act as temporary sedimentation basins because of the problems that we've had on a few other sites. So we've asked for temporary sedimentation basins to be installed uphill of these.
I wasn't aware of that comment, and I would, we could work with that, so that's not an issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Bruce, just so you know, if you didn't mention it, I was going to, so.
Yes, it is. It has already been discussed. Like, once again, you know, I want to make sure everybody's aware of this from a public perspective, you know, and Bruce, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Bart just brought it up to me, you know, I think our first version of the redo on this was almost a year, maybe even longer than a year ago. We've gone through and we've had a lot of discussion with staff. We've tried to make a lot of changes to the best of our ability to make this as good a project as we possibly can. And we brought it to the commission at a stage where, after we'd had a lot of discussion, where we thought it was at that point where this was the best project we could come up with. Obviously, I understand, you know, everybody, you know, basically the general concept is nobody wants it developed, everybody wants it left the same. Unfortunately, you know, we all have to remember too that the owner of this property does have a right to develop it. So we're trying to kind of find that middle ground of making it as responsible of a development as possible, as, you know, little impact as possible, and meeting all the requirements and regulations of the town of Farmington, but still creating the best plan we possibly can.
So Neil, does that answer your question?
I know I kind of just went through and went through a lot of the kind of comments and everything, but
No, I just want to make sure Neil got some information because he's the one that was raising the question. So I just want to make sure that he got some answers.
absolutely.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the I appreciate the commentary and the depth. So yes, thank you.
Okay. Do you have any other questions, comments?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. Robert?
The first question I have, I think we'll go to Bruce. I just want to make sure that I'm clear that the agenda review notes that came out last week, dated the 24th of November, it indicates there are still some outstanding items to be addressed for the town staff and the engineering staff. Is that correct, Bruce?
Yeah, there was our comments that we had on the list. They said they were working on those. And I think that was about I think that was about it.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to be clear that the notes from last week were accurate, that there still are some issues to be addressed. My preference, given the interest in the application and some of the engineering aspects, would be, and this, I guess, is a comment for consideration by the rest of the commission, is that we not close the hearing. I'd rather see the technical and engineering comments be addressed during the hearing period. One of the questions, if I recall, we had talked previously about preserving and relocating some of the stone walls. Is that part of the current plan? I guess I would go to the applicant.
So we had discussed that with, so obviously the stone walls that are, you know, not inside of any of the development area are going to remain. We had discussed that with the applicant about, you know, ways he may be able to use some of those materials, either decoratively on site, which he was not opposed to. We also had talked about using some of that potentially for delineation of those rear property boundaries and some of the limits of limits of work. I can certainly have we can get a statement from the applicant as to exactly how he plans to reuse them. I know from our site walk, we had kind of generally talked about it a little bit about at least being able to use them kind of decoratively at the entry potentially, just from a reuse perspective, and you know, kind of to pay homage back to the land itself. So.
Okay, and then another comment that we had talked about at prior meetings is there was a fair amount of service debris, farming debris, tires, some farm cans and bottles, and different types of waste. I just want to reiterate that all of the superficial solid waste should be removed, and there was one area on the western portion of the site, probably behind where lots 8 and 9 were. It was on the far side of the stone wall. There was a larger deposit area that was probably in the wetlands, so that could not, you know, no mechanical equipment to remove the waste in that area. So is there agreement with the applicant that all of the superficial solid waste is going to be removed and properly disposed of off-site?
Correct. Yep.
Thank you, Brian. And then, because we heard some comments about some of the wildlife on the property, was there a DEP natural diversity database review of the property?
This site does not fall within the natural diversity database outline. At least the currently does not. No.
Okay, but that was checked.
Yes, correct.
Right, thank you. And then just a general comment. I know that there was a lot of concerns raised both verbally during the hearing and also in the written correspondence received. I wish that this commission could provide assurances that the development would not have any negative impacts on the existing neighborhoods, but unfortunately, this commission can't provide any type of assurance along those lines once we have all the information in the record. I tend to approach applications by looking to see whether they meet the legal requirements at the time. So we do have requirements from a wetlands perspective that need to be adhered to for the site. It looks like there has been a lot of changes in the design of the proposed development. There is no direct development within the wetland area. There is, you know, a relatively large area within the upland review that falls within our jurisdiction, but it appears that the developer has made reasonable efforts to try and minimize work within the upland review area. And I started my comments by asking about the engineering review and technical review comment from staff. I think that will be critical in my mind in weighing in on whether or not all of the requirements for surface water and groundwater management are met, and that will be evaluated at the time that we make a decision. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for questions and comments. Bobby, maybe on mute.
There?
Yes.
Yes, I was, because I thought I heard some feedback and I didn't want to get accused. So, thank you, Robert. Rich?
Two questions. The first is there's been some discussion about the maintenance of these basins and what exactly would be involved. But it may have come up in a prior meeting, but I simply don't remember. What entity will be responsible for performing that maintenance? Will it be a homeowner association, or is the town going to have to step up to this? I just want to be clear on what that is, what's happening in that regard. And then tonight you presented a increased footprint for these two basins. And I'm kind of wondering, what is the net impact that making that increase will do? Will it reduce the peak runoff coming off the site, or where was what were you intending the benefit of doing that to be?
So first, the detention basins are both located within the open space, which is going to be town owned, in that, so those would be town owned and town maintained. The idea, the concept behind the enlargement of the basins would be to, create those basins so that they could potentially hold back more water, and then therefore also increase the footprint at the bottom of the basin, which would be increasing the infiltration area. And so, yes, it would reduce the actual amount of runoff on site. Once again, at the kind of current design, we were trying to get as close as we could to mimicking the already existing natural characteristics of the drainage area. So we still meet zero increase in runoff with the current condition. When we looked at infiltration, we do have a reduction in total volume of water leaving the site, which means that there is an increase in infiltration based over the entire time of the storm. But by increasing the sizes of those basins, then potentially we could slow that peak even greater, and offset the peak between essentially the storm and where all that water is going into the neighbors. Could offset that peak by, we haven't run the calculations of the numbers yet for what that would be, but it could offset it by a couple of hours. As Bart had mentioned, it could be a couple hours, it could be 8 hours, it could be 12 hours, making the amount of water that leaves that outlet control structure. We can make those outlets smaller. Just to touch base on, another comment, as far as the how that water is leaving those basins. So we do have an outlet control structure. That water leaves the outlet control structure, travels through a pipe, goes into what's called an infiltration level spreader. So essentially those are infiltration structures, and the very top row of those infiltration structures are left open, and then there's a riprap pad that after that. And so what happens is the water comes out of the outlet control structure, fills up those infiltration galleys. Once it reaches a level where the infiltration galleys are almost full, that top row of holes in the infiltrators, it then leaves that, goes through the riprap, and is dispersed so that it kind of can run naturally overland sheet flow back to the wetlands. So what we could essentially do by making those ponds bigger is reduce the size of that outlet control structure opening, the orifice in it, and let less water out at a time, which would slow down and reduce the amount of volume that leaves the site right away, and hold more of that water in the basin. Obviously, the only other thing that comes up from that, as this is a two-part kind of thing, is that could potentially mean that more of that water would be getting infiltrated because you have a larger surface area to infiltrate the water. And so therefore you would have more of that water going back to groundwater and then to the wetlands as it is. So once again, that was a recommendation from staff that we kind of take a look at it, offer it as an option based on some of the comments, questions, concerns by the neighbors. But I don't know necessarily from reading all the correspondence and from hearing the testimony, I don't necessarily know that the surface water, I obviously heard, from quite a few people that surface water is obviously a consideration, a concern for them. There were a couple comments about potholes staying full of water, and a couple of letters about ponds in people's front yards and whatnot. But I think more of it had to do with groundwater. So I think that the design that we kind of have, it kind of seems more like that's that balance that everybody's looking for. And it also reduces any additional impact we have to upland review. So I'm tending to, from what we had heard from other, from the public, kind of leaning more toward that being the better answer to those questions. And I think, Dave, if you want to chime in with anything, I don't know. You had your hand raised.
Yes, Glenn, I had one. I do have one comment, or a couple of comments to make.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
These comments are, this is David Lord for the applicant. I have a couple of responses to Commissioner Kelsey's concern or question. Something to the effect, we don't know why the problems are happening in the adjacent neighborhoods. I can tell you, in looking at the soils on our site versus those soils immediately off-site to the northwest and to the north of our site, there's a very specific, readily visible, at least to a soil scientist, why there are issues on the neighboring properties. The soils north and northwest of our site are a totally different soil structure than are on the subject property. The soils on the northwest and north are silt loam to very fine sandy loam soils that have very much slower infiltration rates and permeability rates than those soils on the subject property, which are fine sandy loams to gravelly fine sandy loams, Cheshire soils. Slope is also a factor. This site has slope. It has good drainage internally to assist the soils in infiltrating surface water as it runs off the site before it reaches the subject wetland. In short, the soils off-site, immediately off-site to the north and northwest, are classifiable as moderately well-drained soils. They have a natural native water table condition that is anywhere between 1.5 feet and 2 feet below the original soil surface. Any construction into those types of soils, those types of grades, needed to have very, very good curtain drains, foundation drains around the structure itself. That's the reason, because of the time period of construction when those houses were constructed, that they now have sump pumps which run almost permanently. The high groundwater table is a natural feature of those soil areas. They are just in a low-lying area which do not have good internal drainage and have a persistent water table flowing through, in most cases, from the house location in the direction of the closest wetland. So we do have, or at least from my perspective, I have a good idea of why the houses immediately off-site of this project site are experiencing the problems that they are. It's also an underlying reason why we continually make the statement that what we are proposing to do will not, in all likelihood, and that's as far as you can go because Mother Nature doesn't believe in absolutes, have the opinion that what we're doing on this site is not going to adversely affect the neighboring properties. They will continue to have those situations of ponding water in yard areas because of the slow drainage and the elevated water table in the immediate area of those house locations. And that's all I have to say regarding that point. I just wanted to make sure that Commissioner Kelsey understood that we do have an understanding of what the problems are in the adjoining neighbors' property. And we can do all we can on our site development-wise to
think we just lost. him.
keep
There he
that
goes.
at the same and actually a little volume of water off our site. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I address why staff asked for the applicant to take a look at larger basin footprints?
Please do.
Sure. So we, Mr. Sear and I have spent considerable time looking at the drainage, looking at groundwater elevations submitted with the 2014 application, elevations submitted now with the 2021 application, and reconciling discrepancies with elevations, reviewing drainage calculations. Admittedly, Mr. Sear has reviewed the actual calculations in detail more so than I have. I've spent more with elevations and just understanding groundwater flow and where these the patterns are and where the basement elevations are, foundation drains are versus the basin bottoms, and then groundwater elevations based on field data that's been collected and presented. We looked at it again today with the new elevation data that had been submitted, say a few weeks ago, and reinforced our request to have these basins enlarged. In part, the stormwater calculations are based on known stormwater runoff from the road, from driveways. The roofs are being infiltrated into galleys, so the roofs come out of that. But really the stormwater from the road and the driveways. And so those are known quantities, and then there's the overland flow that comes into the drainage calculations. And as the applicant stated, and the calculations show, the peak runoffs are being met or decreased, which is so that from a flow standpoint and the flow of water that's being experienced through the pipes, because this piping network obviously flows north to Whispering Rod and Redcoat neighborhood, and then continues north and east and tracks right into and through Unionville. What also is going to happen there's foundation drains. So there's foundation drains for these homes, 4 of which, the 4 homes to the south, closer to the closest to Coppermine, the two on the east and 2 on the west. Those foundations and foundation drains are below the seasonal high groundwater. So they're not in constant water table, but they're below the seasonal high. So those are going to run at the same time that we are most likely to see the highest rainfall and our basins be kind of full to begin with. And also there will be a curtain drain in the road because of the water table and needing to ensure that we're not having water infiltration in the sanitary sewer system, et cetera. So that curtain drain will be discharging out to these basins. Those flows can't be quantified. There's no good way for us to quantify that groundwater flow at any given point in time. So our thought was to increase the basins to accommodate those flows in a reasonable fashion, so that as this then is discharging off site, we are assured that there is still we're still maintaining that peak flow and or even decreasing it. And so these larger basin volumes offer that opportunity. So we're not looking at overtopping pipes, because there's culverts that are under Whispering Rod, under Redcoat. And we wanted to make sure, again, to the best of our ability, that there's a factor of safety built into this to accommodate those. So there are, again, at least 4 foundation drains that will run. And all the homes, of course, have foundation drains, but there's at least 4 that are in the seasonal high groundwater. And of course, like I said, they curtain drain for the roadway itself. So that was the thought process behind it. And I just felt it important as part of Mr. Berlandi's question and addressing that question. And so the commission understood why that request was made and where it came from. And either Bruce or I could answer any additional questions if the commission has questions regarding that.
And to follow up, Shannon, so I was unaware of that reasoning, but we are definitely in support of that. That's just a good logical kind of factor of safety, additional factor of safety to add. And we fully support that, and can certainly make adjustments.
Okay.
Rich,
That's all I have to share at the moment, Mr. Chair. Thank you for allowing me.
Yep. No, Rich, are you all set?
I just wanted to confirm something I thought I heard. I thought I heard Bart say that the basins as originally configured, there would be a 10% reduction in the peak discharge rate.
Yeah, I was doing a quick off my head. It ranges between 6 and 13%. So on average, about a 10% reduction.
Okay.
If you look at the drainage computations, I mean, that's basically what it shows on that. There's a chart.
Depends on the storm that you're looking at.
Yeah, it varies with the storm. As you get the 100-year storm is a little bit less because it's going to be a slight overtopping on the internal wear. But for the pipes and the inside, you're about 10%.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to change the order of my questions. I'm going to just follow up with what Rich was talking about because I have a general question where I believe you said it was about 10% less surface flow than current conditions. Is that correct? I mean, Ren, you just said like between 6 and 13.
For the surface runoff, yes. From the overall water quantity, there's no change in runoff between subsurface and surface water, but we are reducing the surface water by about 10%.
Right, that's what I thought you said. So from what I'm hearing from some of the residents that live over in Whispering Rod, Red Coat Lane, that type of thing, that the issue is more with groundwater rather than surface water. So I'm just trying to get this straight in my head that if we're decreasing surface water, but we're not decreasing water as a whole, that means we're increasing groundwater. And I'm just wondering if that plays into this scenario with what some of the other neighbors are being impacted by because there's more water going into the ground. And you know,
I understand your question and the difference between the two. Realizing that there is no change in overall water, it's just surface and groundwater. The amount of change in groundwater is not appreciably going to change the groundwater table. All right, it's going to seek its own level based on the elevation of the brook, a lot of different factors. So we're not taking that extra 10% and raising the groundwater table up 2 feet. If anything, you wouldn't be able to measure it. It's measured in the thousandths of an inch as opposed to feet. It's a minimal change in elevation of the groundwater table because remember, the groundwater table isn't instantaneous one area. It's spread over multiple acres of area. And we're not going to have that impact that we're significantly raising the groundwater table. Anything we're talking about infiltration is also going to do the same thing. So that's why the bigger detention area is good from the standpoint of helping reduce those surface flows. The infiltration is going to get into the groundwater and it's going to, help establish a groundwater table. But again, I don't see that groundwater table moving appreciably because we're dumping, an extra 10,000 gallons of water into that during a storm. The other thing I will say, and I'm just looking at the area map, and I'm gonna volunteer this, is I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna look at that area where these neighbors have talked about some of the groundwater. And I want to look at some of the surface drainage features, some of the culverts, just so I'm a little more familiar. I probably remiss in not doing this beforehand, but I'm looking at this map. I want to kind of understand, is this brook going through a 24-inch pipe or a 12-inch pipe or twin pipes, and what the condition of those pipes are? Because that could have some bearing on what's happening, at least on the short-term basis, on some of these storms going through here.
Thank you. And David, seeing as how you decided to start talking about some of the soil characteristics, I'm going to ask you this question, because in terms of the soils that are there for subsurface flow, I mean, what are you generally talking about? Maybe, distance per day some of this water travels. I mean, I'm assuming that what you had mentioned earlier, we're over on Redcoat Lane, that area where it really has that sort of silty material. So it's a very slow process. I'm assuming water flows through there at a much slower pace than the water flowing through the ground where this project is located. So can you give me a rough idea what we're looking at?
Based on the soils, I haven't looked specifically at that, and I can get that information for you. It is, as you said, a function of the soil type and which relates to the soil texture, but also grade and slope affected. So I had to get back to you on the answer to that.
No, I'm just curious. I just
not
have these questions in my mind about the drainage, whether it's surface or subsurface. So I'm just trying to clear this up in my head to get a better understanding.
Yeah, again, groundwater moves at a very, very slow rate versus surface water.
No, understood.
That's as finite as I can get at this point, but I will have some better specifics based on soil types that are there and give you that at the next session.
Okay, no, thank you. Shannon, with your description of looking at the larger basins, you actually addressed some of the questions that I had, where it looked like some of the basement elevations were lower than the modeling elevations and some of the test pits. So I understand where you're coming with, from some of that information. Also looking at, I just need to get some clarity on this. I was looking at the application and there may have been modifications made to this. But the application, when it came in on page 3, it talked about, like, at the northern detention basin, it initially had a galley top of elevation, the top of the galley was 331, the bottom of the galley was 327. It looks like that's been modified now. On page 10, it talks about top of galley at 332.5 and bottom of galley at 328.5. So I'm just trying to make sure that the numbers we're looking at for the elevations and how that's played out, how that works. And the reason I'm raising the question is because it appears as though some of those, the bottom of the galleys may actually be lower than the modeling elevations, which to me indicates the high groundwater table. And if that is in fact the case, then how will these proposed concrete galleys function?
So I'll just touch base on those galleys once again. So those structures, obviously the modeling layer is obviously the seasonal high groundwater layer or elevation. Those are standard 4-foot concrete galleys. So the elevation, I think when we had done the check there, at that location, that could be a situation where the bottom of the galley is maybe a foot, may end up being a foot into the seasonal high groundwater table. I would have to double check a little bit more detail, but the function of that infiltration level spreader is really just to basically disperse that water in a very slow kind of fashion. So as you can see in the detail that Bruce just pulled up for us here, even if the bottom of that was seasonal high groundwater modeling elevation a foot above, that would just mean that during the high groundwater period, the bottom of that would be filled with a foot of water. As the water enters from the basin into that structure, it's just going to continue to fill it up until it overflows out of the top row of galleys at grade through the riprap and disperse. And then whatever's left inside, remaining inside of that, will slowly infiltrate back into the ground. So I guess if you were looking at this in a, kind of worst case scenario, groundwater's at its highest peak, the pond is filling up with water, this would still function. And it would still function as intended. You just wouldn't be seeing as much water infiltrating into the ground because your groundwater is already high. It would still be infiltrating through the sides of the structure, and then you'd still be getting that kind of dispersing effect where it lets off that water at a relatively slow rate through that top section and gets dispersed even further by the riprap kind of following at grade.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, the last question I think I have right now is, I know we typically talk about peak flows, but I want to ask a question as to the total water volume and whether or not that may be increased with this proposed subdivision. I know that you have the proposed, actually I do have a couple more questions, but I know you've got proposed the foundation drains and you've got, I guess, the roof leaders coming off of the roof. Now that's all supposed to go into a dry well, and I'm assuming that you guys are going to monitor the elevations there also based on the test pits so that you've got some room to put water in there and not just have everything plugged up and backed up. So I'm assuming that you do take a close look at the elevations where the high groundwater table is when you're putting in these units so that the base is above that. So you can pretty much get the flow into those dry wells as you need, correct?
Correct. And that's also the reason why we don't size any of those and show any of the sizes of those on our plans. There, it's more depicted as, because every single house, as the house comes in, we'll take the actual, the roof size, we'll make sure everything is right. We'll look at that groundwater elevation. We'll see how much depth we actually have. There's a whole variety of different, units out there that we can use that vary in height. And then, and obviously depending on the height, if it's a, much shallower system, it's generally a little bit wider. We may need 5 or 6 units to accomplish the same thing as one of those 48-inch galleys, but we'll make sure that the volume that provides and that stores is adequate and out of the seasonal high groundwater table, correct?
And that'll be based on a house by house basis.
House by house
as it's
basis,
constructed.
during the plot plan process type of thing, yes.
Okay, and then the last question is a 2-step question. What's the total acreage that is proposed to be disturbed with the subdivision? I don't need it to like the 0.00 number, but just roughly the number of acres.
I think you're probably in the range of about 5 acres, maybe slightly less than 5 acres.
I think
so
yeah.
I was gonna say, will this trigger a deep general permit, stormwater general permit?
Yes, it does.
I think it's right around 5 or just over. I
Okay.
think we're right there.
All right, no, I just wanted to double check. That's why I was asking about the acreage. So, okay. All right. I don't have any other questions. Do any of the commission members have any additional questions they want to raise at this time?
Mr. Chair, I do have a question for Mr. Bovee, if you don't mind indulging me again.
I would be happy to indulge you at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Seer, could you put up the colored graphic? Either one doesn't matter. Okay. Mr. Bovee, with respect to groundwater in the basin and whether the basin gets larger and the potential for additional groundwater infiltration with the basin and the concern with groundwater perhaps impacting neighbors if we do increase or don't increase, there's pluses and minuses to both of this, obviously.
Yep.
Having, again, looked at this in drainage patterns, and I know multiple test pits and multiple ground monitoring wells need to be put in to know definitively the direction of groundwater flow. But I believe it's fairly likely from general engineering principles to look at this property and have a general sense that groundwater flow is moving to the west, northwest in this location. And typical rule of thumb is that it typically follows the surface grade, and I certainly recognize that is not the case all the time. But if we go on that assumption that the groundwater flow is generally heading in a westerly, northwesterly direction, if we have these basins and the water that is infiltrating is moving in a westerly to northwesterly direction, it's going to hit that water course first and bleed out into the water course prior to, and then continue in through the water course in the swale to the north, like the surface water would, and it would not necessarily create an increased groundwater burden to the adjacent neighbors. Would you agree with that thought process, or do you have concerns with that thought process?
No, I agree. And I think what it does is kind of replicate what's happening, because as everything pitches to the west, it kind of goes to that brook area and then flows to the north. So I kind of agree with that. And I think, again, it kind of replicates what's happening naturally out there.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chair, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. So if I'm understanding what some other commission members were talking about earlier, the goal right now would not be to close the hearing today. There's still some documentation that town staff is looking for. There's some questions that we've discussed a little bit tonight. So it sounds like the feeling is to hold this open until the first meeting in January, which off the top of my head, I do not remember the date.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, this is Commissioner Eisner. There's a hand up from the public and a question in the chat as to whether the public can have follow-up questions.
Right.
Discretionary call on your part, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would say at this point, probably no, but the hearing will be continued because we're not closing it. So we could theoretically take questions at the January meeting. So it's not preventing people from making their comments, but it would just be at a different time.
Just to add a little bit to what you were saying about the meeting, that we do have a little time left, and we would need to require an extension from the developer. So
our office and staff have already kind of gone through that and talked about that, and the applicant is aware and is more than happy to grant the extension so we can continue this till the January meeting. So Bruce and Shannon, I will get we'll get a letter out to you guys so that can go on the record.
Yeah, I'll talk. Just give us a call first. We'll go over this stuff again.
Perfect.
Right.
And then just also for the public, what's the date of the January meeting?
It's the 5th.
Okay, thank you.
5th, and then the next one is the 19th. So you'll probably be.
Okay. No, I just, again, if people have other questions, they think about some more things, I just want them to know when the hearing would continue. So I think we should be all set on that.
And excuse me, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, public comment can still be sent in via writing as well, right?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. And I think, at the start of this, I believe we mentioned all of the documents that we've already received, and staff will continue to accumulate any new documents that come in and distribute them to commission members.
And to be clear, any written document that comes in is shared not only with the commission, it is shared with the applicant. So the applicant has received copies of all written correspondence as well.
So just for clarification, do we need to have a motion to continue this to January 5th?
Yes, we do.
So would somebody care to make that motion?
So moved by Robert.
Is there a second?
Second,
I'll
Mark.
Okay.
Who was the second? Did you get?
Mark,
Thank you.
those in favor of continuing the hearing to January 5th, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining? Okay, so be it. So hopefully, some of the staff questions, things that may not have been addressed yet, we can try and get all that stuff in as well.
Yep.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, I'd like to clarify, it sounds like, for the most part, the commission would like to see the engineering comments addressed and the plans resubmitted. If not 100%, but at least get, we'll say, get to the 75–80% level at a minimum. I'm seeing head nods. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was clear for all parties. Thank you.
okay,
Yes,
All right.
thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
And I thank you for your time and the effort you put into this. So that concludes this part of the public hearing. However, it will be continued. Planners report, next item on the agenda.
Planners report, not much. We did get, and what did I do with those? Oh, I don't know if I opened them up. Let me see if you can see this. Hold on. We did get some updated pictures on the 1179 Farmington Avenue, and these were just last week.
Was
So,
this after the brief snowfall?
1123? No, it was
just
before.
prior.
It was before.
Okay,
So this is the entrance as you come in. Looks like it's all been mowed. And he said that he told us earlier that it would all be mowed out. So
And the attorney did call today. I told him there wasn't any need to call in, and I said we probably don't really need any formal update until March, April, May. Once we start to see thaw, whenever Mother Nature decides to do that for 2022, that we'll get in and start doing observations to look for amphibian activity. And then, of course, if they have a plan developed to do something with the eastern portion, then they'll come in with that. But there'll probably be very little. I don't even see the need really for, it's not going to change. This is what it's going to look like through the winter. So I wasn't going to continue with requiring aerial photos at this point.
yeah, and we're not going to be dealing with this roadway until after this is established and everybody's happy with it, correct?
Correct.
Exactly.
Right. So that there's at least an access path in there for checking things out and doing any corrective measures that may need to be made.
Okay, thank you. Was that it, Bruce?
that was it.
Okay. Approval of the minutes for November 3rd, 2021 for the Wetlands meeting and the site walk notes of November 13th, 2021. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes
So moved.
and notes? That was Ned?
Ned.
Okay, is there a second?
Mark, second.
Okay. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining,
Mhm.
they're passed, so we'll close this part of the meeting at about 10 o'clock, maybe 9:59. Call the Conservation Commission meeting to order. Land Acquisition Committee report.
They didn't meet. We didn't meet last month.
Okay. Planners report.
I don't have anything.
Okay. And can I get a motion to approve the minutes of November 3rd, 2021 Conservation Commission meeting?
So moved,
Rich.
Mark.
For a second?
Second, Ned.
Okay. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, abstaining? Thank you for your time and your patience tonight.